Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. Thank you for coming. Hi, everybody in the live chat. It looks like the live chat was unusually active before the show tonight, which was nice to see. Quite often when I'm doing a live stream, even like the askaways that are well established and usually pretty well attended, like there will be like silence in the chat until like a couple minutes before showtime, and sometimes it'll be even like right up until the point where I go live, and there won't be anybody saying shit in the live chat. Not so tonight. Thank you, friends. Hello. Hope everybody is well. So, as usual, the way this works is I will be responding to questions for the entire, however the hell long this ends up taking. But before I turn my full attention to all of those wonderful people in the live chat, I am going to spend the first part of the show answering questions that were submitted through Patreon by my Patreon patrons. And once I get through, no, Sarah, the Niners hat is in the other room. I usually only wear the Niners hat for Trek Actually videos, and of course I forgot to wear it this week for the one that went up day before yesterday. So yeah, it's in the other room. But yeah, so anyway, I'm going to answer patron questions first. And once I get through with the patron questions, then I will turn my full attention to the live chat. So if you are watching and you are going to, you're think you might like, offer a, like a super chat or something, or if you just have a question that you want me to respond to in the live chat, just hold on until I get through the patron questions, and then I'll spend the rest of the time talking with the live chat. Because while I'm doing the patron questions, I'm paying attention to that, and I'm not like actively checking the live chat. So here we go with the first of the questions from my wonderful Patreon patrons. And the first question comes from Andrew Priest, who says, "Salutations, you magnificent bastard. Hope you're taking care of yourself these days. Question: what's your favorite Trek romance? We all know the famous love between Kirk and Spock, but to me, Miles O'Brien and Julian Bashir, aka Giles, is my favorite. Forget the subtle insinuations of attraction between Bashir and Garrick. For my money, Bashir had the best relationship on DS9, a series which had virtually nothing but superb interpersonal relationships of every sort, and also Dax and Worf. Um, they loved each other. Julian even admitted that, even though he passionately loved Ezri, he liked Miles a bit more. There's a few other romances that never were, like Geordi and Data, Janeway and Chakotay, or what about Tom Paris and Harry Kim, aka Tori, or maybe Ham, I guess. Anyway, what's your favorite subtextual Trek romance? Well, I had my answer right up until you said subtextual, because the answer that I usually give as far as like what is my favorite Star Trek romance is Captain Kirk and the Enterprise. Because I mean, I know people say Kirk and Spock, and people love to ship Kirk and Spock, but Kirk and the Enterprise, that's really the truest romance in all of Star Trek. I don't know if there is a more deeply felt, unerring devotion than that which Captain Kirk feels for the Enterprise. So that would be, honestly, that would be, and I don't know, but see, I don't know if you could consider that subtextual. I mean, there's that moment in The Naked Time when the ship is, when the old Enterprise was spiraling towards Psi 2000. Um, and they're going to try that, you know, scheme to do a cold restart of the warp engines to try and get the ship to safety. And Kirk is heading to the bridge and trying to pull himself together, and he pauses in the doorway and he says to the ship, "Never lose you, never." I'm like, oh yeah, that's a man that wants to fuck a starship right there. So if it qualifies under the framework of the question, I would say Kirk and the Enterprise is my favorite Star Trek romance. Um, Michael Hanneline says, "I've got a Firefly question for you this time. Now that you've watched a good chunk of the series, do you feel that it is better to have new viewers start with the pilot or with the first aired episode, Train Job? I seem to be in the minority in that I think it's best to start newbies off on Train Job, as the pilot just doesn't capture the perfect balance of humor and drama that the series has. On more than one one occasion, I've seen friends try to get someone into the series with the pilot, and the newbie loses interest before the 90 minutes are up and never give the actual show a chance. I think the pilot is an interesting sort of prequel when you've finished the show. But Train Job was made assuming that viewers hadn't seen the pilot and does a pretty good job at sprinkling in the exposition without putting the brakes on the plot. What do you think? Also, do you plan on watching the movie Serenity to wrap up the series when you're done with the 14 episodes? First of all, yes, we are going to do Serenity on Trek Reluctantly. Dana and I have already discussed it, and we've talked about it on the show a couple of times. When because people have asked, in the chat, like, are you going to do Serenity? And yeah, we're going to do Serenity after we finish the show. Yeah, I don't know. I agree with you that the Train Job is a much better episode than the pilot. But I don't know. I mean, and it obviously it functions just fine as an introduction to the series. I think, the pilot is a good episode, and obviously the pilot is a good introduction to the show too. Like that's what it was designed for. But I think Train Job, I would say, is better just because it's a standard length episode. The pilot is a double episode, and if you are new to the show, as you said, like, you've friends have introduced people to the series using the pilot and they lose interest before the 90 minutes. I think it might be just a problem with the fact that the pilot is a double length episode. And if it's a new show and you are not, for whatever reason, you do not fall into the category of people who are grabbed by it immediately, if it's something that you do have to sort of warm to, having to sit through a 90-minute episode of a show that you're not really sure about is probably more of an obstacle than sitting through a better 1-hour episode, 45-minute episode without commercial. So I might agree with you actually that from the perspective of trying to hook an audience, Train Job might be a better choice than the pilot. So yeah, I think I kind of agree with you there. And it's definitely it's definitely a better episode than the pilot. Like I remember some things about the Train Job. I remember almost not. Like it hasn't been that long. It's been since November, I guess, when we started doing the show and when we watched the pilot. I remember almost nothing about the pilot. Like I mean, I'm sure if somebody prompts me and says, no, but this happened and this happened, remember this? I might remember it, but just sitting here, just left to my own devices thinking about it, I remember nothing about the pilot of Firefly. Agent Meister says, "Hi, Steve. I'm fascinated to know how things are stateside regarding COVID. In my country, you can't travel more than 3 miles from your home for non-essential reasons, and very few businesses are open. Vaccine rollout has been slow, and while I don't like it, but I totally understand why things are the way they are. Unfortunately, like a guy with a beard and a baseball cap sitting in a dark room talking to himself about Star Trek, things aren't looking good, at least in the medium term. I'm just wondering how things are on your side of the pond since the vaccine started rolling out and President Dipshit got given his pink slip last November. Is there a noticeable change for the better in your area compared to, say, 6 months ago? And is that reflected nationally? Also, which do you prefer, hairless Cisco with beard or beardless Cisco with hair? I'm in the latter camp. Keep up the great work, Agent Meister in Ireland." Well, thank you very much, my friend, and thank you for always asking such cool questions. I would say COVID-related things are better, but not significantly better since the Biden administration took over. The vaccine rollout is definitely better. A lot of people are getting vaccinated, which is great. Biden set a goal for 100 million doses of the vaccine, not necessarily 100 million complete vaccines, because the two of the vaccines are double dose, but he said 100 million doses of the like 100 million shots, basically, for people to get the vaccine in the first 100 days of his administration, and they have already met that goal. So they're like way ahead of where they publicly said they wanted to be, which is fantastic. And in my state, Maryland, the governor just today, our governor said that by April 27th, the vaccinations will be open to everybody. So, because I'm not over 60 and I'm not in a high risk group. I don't have pre-existing conditions that put me at a higher risk for developing serious complications if I get it. So I am sort of in the last group that will be able to get the vaccine. And the governor of my state is saying that everybody will be able to get it. So I'll be able to register for an appointment hopefully by April 27th, if not before. So in that sense, things are getting better. In terms of cases and deaths, things are definitely, I think, better than they were when they were at their worst, but things are still not great. And there are, there are states and jurisdictions that are lifting restrictions, that are allowing restaurants, for example, to reopen at full capacity, and lifting a lot of the social distancing restrictions, and allowing businesses to reopen. And I still don't think it's time for that. I mean, I still think it's too early for that. I still think that the infection rates and the rates of new cases. And look, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm parroting the expertise of other people who are saying the same thing, who are saying like this, if we relax restrictions and people begin to grow more lax in terms of their observation of things like social distancing and wearing their masks and et cetera, that the rates of infection are going to go right back up again, because we are not out of the woods yet, and it's too early to be lifting these restrictions. So I'm worried that things might get better and then get worse, which has been the pattern all along. We lock down, people observe social distancing, businesses close, people wear masks in public, and the rates go down. And then people say, "Oh, things are better now. We can relax," and they relax, and then things go back up because we're not actually out of the woods yet. So I'm afraid that that's going to happen again. I hope not. And I hope with the vaccine rollout, maybe it's not as much of a factor, but I'm afraid that that's going to happen. But generally speaking, I would say things are a little better, not a lot better, but a little better. And I greatly prefer hairless Cisco with beard. I like Cisco with hair and no beard too. I think Cisco from seasons 1, 2, and 3 is great, but Hawk Cisco is my favorite for sure. Steven Sutton says, I'm rewatching Picard and noticed something in the episode Stardust City Rag that has sent me down a rabbit hole. I promise you there's a question at the end. Bear with me. The scenario is Picard has to go undercover and so decides to put on what we in the audience would call a French accent. However, Picard is French. To him, he always has a French accent. It's just that we in the audience would call it English, specifically Yorkshire, though diluted. That amused me. Then I realized that every single on-screen Labar character in TNG's family is played by an English actor. Now, I get the logic there. Cast people who sound like Patrick Stewart so that they sound like family members. What I don't get is why they decided to cast Patrick Stewart as Jean-Luc Picard in the first place. Do you know if they wrote the Frenchman first and cast an Englishman? Or if they cast the Englishman and wrote him as French? Either way, why? It's never struck me as peculiar until now. I believe that the part was written and the character was conceived of and named before they cast anybody. So Patrick Stewart came second. And I think probably the way it happened was Gene Roddenberry created the character of Picard and named him and decided on his background and everything like that. Him being French and having that be an important part of his character. And then they cast this awesome actor to play him, and they just didn't worry about it, because I think they correctly realized that if the show was good enough, it wouldn't be anything more than a trivial footnote, just something that us Trekkies kind of think about and snicker at. Like, Picard is supposedly super French, but he's played by this English actor who is speaking with an English accent. And they're like, there's no attempt to give him a French affect at all, right? And it's just kind of a funny little thing about Star Trek: The Next Generation that you don't really think about or care about or notice. Like you even say in your question, you never noticed it until just recently when he's affecting a very, very caricature of a French accent in that episode. So no, I think it's just something the character came first, and then they cast a really great actor. And of course, there is a story, you probably have heard this, that during his screen test or during one of the early in pre-production of the series, they asked Patrick Stewart to do a line reading of Picard in a French accent, and he did it, and apparently it did not come across very well. I think Patrick Stewart himself has said that he sounded like he was doing Inspector Clouseau. And so he didn't like it. The producers didn't like it. So they said, okay, you're not going to do that. So you'll just be a French guy with a British accent, and that's the way it'll be. I think it was that. The character came first. They casted an actor who happened to have a British accent, who couldn't do a very good French accent, and they said, screw it, we're going to go with that. And it's probably no more complicated than that. John Burns says, it's been strange for me lately after the Dr. Seuss books were ended because of capitalism. Collectors went on a buying spree because everything still exists if you have enough money, so yay capitalism. A conservative buddy didn't like how this was done. Canceling books was playing politics, he said. Yay capitalism, I responded, because those who did it could do it because of capitalism. How could Pepe Le Pew be canceled? Yay, capitalism. It's almost as if, the places you'll go, although acceptable on racist and sexist grounds, might be too much of a promotion of ableism. And in 20 years, thanks to capitalism, it will also be canceled. But I'm not losing anything as I don't have the book. Yes, capitalism is terrible and moral people can play politics, but if you're a majority shareholder, all of that doesn't matter. And capitalism came out of mercantilism, which came of Protestantism, as Euro countries realized they didn't need to obey the Catholic Church while exploring. As usual, my friend, you have left me at a loss as to how to respond to any of this. So I will just tell you, thank you for the question. I agree with you that the people who decry the quote unquote canceling of Dr. Seuss, because of course it was nothing of the kind. But the people who decry the supposed cancellation of Dr. Seuss while also extolling the virtues of unfettered capitalism and the wisdom of the free market are hypocrites, whether they know it or not. They may not even know that what they're saying is hypocritical or contradictory. But that's what's you cannot extol the virtues of the market and say like, oh, the market knows what to do. Free market is the way to go. And then if people participating in that market decide to allow some of their products to go out of print, which is what happened. The Seuss estate decided to take those books out of print. Like, that's the market. That's a capitalist making a decision. So how is that not like, so yeah, it's inconsistent and it's hypocritical and I think a lot of them don't realize it. And those who do realize it don't care because, the people who make a living out of making a big deal about that kind of stuff, like the Sean Hannitys and the Ben Shapiros and stuff, they're grifters and they're just flogging an act. They're just telling their audience what they know their audience wants to hear, to get them to keep subscribing to their show and listening to their show. And so they can keep their ad rates up. And those of the ones that have Patreons or other kind of crowdfunding things to keep their subscribers, they're doing it. It's a gig, that's why they don't care about the fact that they're being hypocritical, because their audiences don't care either, because they've been trained not to care. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it is capitalism. And if you love capitalism, you shouldn't really be complaining, should you? Isaiah Taylor says, so Steve, I just cut off contact with my adopted mother over an argument about me being negative and unappreciative. We got into a scrap about this as she says that I'm not being thankful that I have the job that I have. The thing is that I am thankful, but I just don't show it. I come to work, the boss tells me what I need to do, and I do it to the best of my abilities. I'm not proud because I was told to do a task and I did that task. Maybe because of my disability, I have difficulty understanding concepts of kindness and gratitude. I guess my childhood upbringing made me see the world in a more dour and negative light. I don't want to think this way, but I can't see myself being friends with someone who doesn't understand me. To be fair, I have been building up my confidence as that has been my greatest weakness. What do you think? Well, if you think that it is the best thing for you to cut off contact with your mother, then I think that's what you should do. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. It's a decision that you make about your own life and who you are choosing to associate with. And if you think that she doesn't understand you to the point that it's difficult to interact with her and it is affecting the quality of your life in such a way that you think you're better off not having contact with her, then I think you should do that. And I don't think you need to feel bad about it. I mean, you're doing what's best for you and for your emotional well-being and for your life. Just because someone is family, whether they are adopted family or blood family, that there shouldn't be any distinction there. If someone is your family, they're your family. And just because someone is your family That doesn't mean you are obligated to keep them in your life if they are making your life miserable. I mean, I say this a lot. I say this on this show. I say this to other people in my life. I say this to myself. Life is too short. Life is too short. And we're only here once. You get one life. And you need to decide for yourself if having a person in your life who makes you miserable, who makes you feel disrespected, who makes you feel misunderstood, and is bringing down the quality of your life, if that person is really worth keeping in your life. You have the right to make that decision. And you have the right to decide for yourself what to do. And once you've made that decision, you have the right to move on and to live your life as you see fit, as long as you're not hurting anybody, and maybe it'll hurt your mom's feelings, but that's not what I'm talking about. You're not inflicting unnecessary suffering on her. You're making a decision based on your own needs and your own health and your own peace of mind. And there's nothing in the world wrong with that. So I think you're completely within your rights and completely within reason to do that. So, and I mean, for whatever it means, and I guess it means something because you asked the question. For whatever it means, I think you're doing the right thing. If it's the right thing for you, and you have the power to make that decision, then I support you in that. I think you're doing the right thing. So, there you go. Eric Allen says, all right, Steve, given that the masses have finally learned of the ancient thought experiment, the ship of Theseus, due to WandaVision, yes, I'm pulling my hipster card, how do you think the conversation would go between pre-Best of Both Worlds Picard, Locutus, assuming he won't try to assimilate them, but rather engage in philosophical conversation, and post in Arcadia Ego Picard? I think pre-Best of Both Worlds Picard would probably have, the more philosophical outlook on it because he hasn't had those experiences yet of the other two. I think Locutus, if Locutus would be able to engage in philosophical conversation, it would be interesting because Locutus did not think of himself as Picard. Locutus referred to Picard in the third person. Locutus thought of himself as the embodiment of the Borg collective. So Locutus would probably take the position that even though he was Picard's body, he was not himself Picard. So that would be sort of how he would relate to the ship of Theseus. Like even it could be possible in the case of Picard and Locutus, there is an essence, there is a consciousness, there is something that made Picard Picard apart from his outward appearance, his physical body. And Locutus would say that he no longer had that he was no longer Picard, he was Locutus, even though he was still Picard's body. And Picard, from after the season 1 finale of the Picard series, would probably say just the opposite, that even though his body no longer contained any original materials to his previous form, that even though he was in a completely new vessel, he was a completely new ship, that he was still Picard. He was, and not just like Picard, not just a very, very close copy of Picard, but he was himself the same Picard that he had been before, because he has the consciousness, because he has not just the memories, because memories, can be copied and transferred like in a computer. But I think the Picard series goes to pains to establish for us that it is the same Picard, that his consciousness has been moved, not copied and sort of written onto a new disk as a copy, but has actually been lifted out of his head and moved into the brain of the golem. So I think he would probably view it as in that way, that he was still the same ship. He was still Picard, even though he was in a completely new vessel, because he carried the essence of it. So actually, I think Locutus and post Ed and Arcadia Ego Picard would probably have a similar take on it, that there is something ineffable about an object or about a person that makes them that person. And if that is absent, then even if the body is the same, they are no longer that person. And if it is present, then they are still the same person, even if the body is different. That's my guess. Ohoyerno says, here's a question for your Is Batman X series. Is Batman a Mary Sue? I think sometimes you can make the argument that he is. Yeah, for sure. I think Silver Age Batman uh, probably was most of the time. I think Batman in the Adam West series definitely was, and I think that was part of the joke, that he was impossibly good at everything, and he thought of every contingency, and he was smarter than everybody else, and he could make these completely ludicrous leaps of logic and be right, and he could win in every fight, and he could escape from any death trap. And I think that Batman was definitely a Mary Sue, and even though I don't know if they would have used that term back then, I think it was very conscious on the part of the writers. That was part of the joke of the show. I it's less it's less obvious now, because I think even though modern Batman is depicted as being um, incredibly competent, and as being, the world's greatest detective and the world's greatest martial artist, I mean, and as someone who is a fan of Batman, that gets a little old to me. Like, I mean, okay, world's greatest detective, fine, but like, and the world's greatest fighter, and he's the smartest and he's the best. It's like, he doesn't have to be the best at everything. Like, I don't necessarily picture Batman as being the best at everything, but a lot of people write him that way. And I think when he is written that way, it's fair to say that he is a Mary Sue. But it's a little more complicated when he is written as a flawed character, because even in depictions of Batman, when he is written as just impossibly good at everything, there are versions of that where, that aside, he is a very flawed character, and he is written self-consciously that way, self-consciously by the writer, not self-consciously as far as Batman goes, but the writer is intentionally making him out to be a flawed character. And Mary Sue's, usually, even if they're like super good at everything, they're not usually written as like flawed characters. So yeah, it's a tough question, but short answer, yes. In many different versions, I would say yes, Batman would unquestionably qualify as a Mary Sue. Yeah. David Colby says, so you know how poker games are fun because you're manipulating and wagering on probabilities, using your knowledge of how the cards and your friends work in a social mathematic space to produce outcomes that are favorable to you? Tabletop role-playing games are like that, but with an actual plot and rules that make sense, unlike poker, which is just a complete fucking mystery to me. What even is a spade or a club, Steve? Answer me that with your precious science. Also, now you know why people keep asking you to play TTRPGs, even if you don't want to, since you seem perpetually confused, so I decided to help by explaining. With my question, it's my $5 a month. I can do what I want. You're not my dad. The joke's on you, buddy. I don't like poker either. um, Let me see. How does that Sting song go? What even is a spade or a club? He knows that the spades are the swords of a soldier. He knows that the clubs are weapons of war. He knows that diamonds mean money for this art. But that's not the shape of my heart. See, Sting told us what it all meant in that beautiful and incredibly memorable song of his from years ago called Shape of My Heart, that I know you all remember. Next question. Next question is from Dana, who says, your new Ask a Professional YouTuber series is off to a great start. The videos are smart, funny, and weird, but they're also actually helpful. Kind of like you, now that I think about it. Anyway, now that you're an official YouTube big shot, if you could go back and offer some advice or words of wisdom to NoobTube Steve back in early 2011, what would you say? I would encourage my younger self to be much more proactive in curating the comment section and in blocking people, because even though I became somewhat known for that among certain crybabies who didn't like me anyway, eventually, and they say, oh, Steve blocks everybody. It took me a while to start doing that. I was very slow when I started attracting like abuse and harassment from anti-feminist types. Um, I was very slow to start, like, moderating my comments. And once I started doing it, even though it's time consuming sometimes, once I started doing it, I realized, like, this is the way to do it. Like, everybody should be doing this. Like, everybody with a large enough YouTube following where you get, dozens or hundreds of comments or more on your videos, everybody should be doing this. should be moderating comments, should be curating their comment section to screen out the abuse and the hate and the spam and the trolling and everything that makes the comment sections of a lot of videos just utterly unusable to people who are there to actually talk about the video and have, discussions with the maker of the video or with the other viewers. Like that to me, that's what the comment section is for. And if it's full of trolling and hatred and bile, and just clutter, people who are talking about shit that have nothing to do with the video and who are just getting into arguments with each other and insulting each other and harassing each other and harassing the creator of the video, like it makes the comment section unusable. So I would say to my younger self back then, get in the habit of moderating your comments now. Make that a normal thing for your channel right now. And I would also say maybe start a Patreon a few years earlier. I'm just saying. Jim Baker says, as a man who enjoys opening a can of worms or two, I submit to you this for pondering. In my subjective opinion, the Disney Star Wars movies have not been even close to as good as the Lucas ones. That being said, Jon Favreau and Pedro Pascal have brought new life into the Star Wars verse with The Mandalorian, which, in my humble opinion, is the best thing they've done since Lucas. My question is, have you seen it? Did you like it? Why or why not? Forgive me, I know that is 3 questions instead of 1, but they are all closely related. Thanks for taking the time, buddy. Yeah, I've seen The Mandalorian. I like The Mandalorian. Now that I've had some time to think it over, I think I definitely like the first season better than the second season, but I like it. I think it's a good show. It's a space Western, and I enjoy space Westerns. And since I'm sure this question is going to come up because we're watching Firefly, and Firefly is also very much a space Western, I think The Mandalorian is a better show than Firefly. I don't think it's even close. Like, The Mandalorian's a way better show than Firefly. But I don't think I like The Mandalorian as much as a lot of people. I would not say that The Mandalorian is the best Star Wars thing since the Lucas films. I don't think The Mandalorian at its very best has even come close to how much I enjoyed The Last Jedi. Like, I think The Last Jedi is just a brilliant film. I don't think The Mandalorian is anywhere even close to that in terms of quality or in terms of taking the franchise in a bold new direction. But I really, really like The Last Jedi. And I have liked, to varying degrees, all of the Disney sequels. Like, I didn't think The Rise of Skywalker was that terrible. I didn't think it was nearly as good as The Last Jedi. I didn't even think it was as good as The Force Awakens, which I also enjoyed. And I thought there were a lot of things about The Rise of Skywalker that were really, really frustrating as someone who particularly liked The Last Jedi. But I don't think overall, looking back at it, or even looking at it at the time when I first saw it, I don't think it's a terrible movie. It's not a great movie, but I don't strongly dislike it. I don't think it deserves the vitriol that is directed at it. It's better than any of the prequels. Like, it's so much better than any of the prequels. Not that that's a very high bar to clear in my opinion, because I don't like the prequels at all. But so no, but yes, I like The Mandalorian a lot, and I like Pedro Pascal. I think he's terrific as a human being and as an actor, and he's specifically very good as the Mandalorian in the show. I think Favreau has done a great job. I think Dave Filoni has done a good job, and even though I have not really seen a lot of his animated stuff, and the little bit of it that I have seen, I've just kind of shrugged at. Just, okay. Like, I'm not nearly as taken with the Dave Filoni stuff as a lot of Star Wars fans are. But he deserves kudos for The Mandalorian, because I do think The Mandalorian is a good show. Definitely. Radical Bacon says, why won't the press call the shooting of Asian people in Atlanta a goddamn hate crime? What is this bullshit about him having a bad day? Yeah, I mean, the press should call it that. And some people in the press, some individual journalists are calling it a hate crime and are saying, why isn't this being called a hate crime? But I agree with you that, the sort of major mass media outlets need to be calling it a hate crime a lot more than they are. And the police, law enforcement, they're the one. That's where that bad day shit came from. The sheriff said, and he didn't mean it in the sense of, he didn't mean it to be that definitive, but he said it, and people took it that way. Because he said it almost dismissively, like, and then he had a bad day, and this is what he did. And I don't think he intended for it to blow up that way, but like, he said it, and he's responsible for saying it, and he should not have said it. because this obviously was not just someone having a bad day and deciding to go on a killing spree. Um, it was a hate crime. It was someone who specifically targeted people of a particular ethnicity for acts of violence. And like, if that's not a hate crime, what is? It's totally a hate crime. And I agree with you. It is bullshit that people are, picking up that he had a bad day thing and carrying that forward as though that is an acceptable description of what happened, when it's totally not. It's totally not. It was a hate crime and people need to call it that. I agree with you 100%. General Contact Unit Problem Child says you skipped a regular Q&A, so I assume that means I can ask 2 questions. Oh, you're pushing it. Okay, I don't care. The bad guy in the sci-fi novel I'm reading is very obviously based on Trump. We're told that he's not conventionally intelligent. He has an uncanny ability to get people to crave his approval and want to please him. Do you think people overestimate how charismatic Trump is? Like, I kind of believe the right were just ready for we're just ready for an authoritarian populist in 2016 and pushed Trump into that role. I strongly suspect he'd have gotten nowhere if he ran in a different time. 2, the other day we were talking about Joss Whedon on Cody Johnston's podcast, and his guest pointed out that a lot of other famous directors, he mentions Hitchcock and Kubrick, were assholes in a pretty similar way to Whedon. It made me wonder, if we say you can't be a filmmaker if you're a toxic creep, would that result in a lot of incredible films not being made? First of all, no, I don't think that Trump is terribly charismatic. I think he's actually quite stunningly uncharismatic for a person who has been as successful as he has in terms of the public eye and celebrity. I don't think he's very charismatic at all. He's a terrible speaker. He's not funny. He never seems relaxed or at ease in any sort of space. And he's bad at all of the things that politicians are supposed to have to be good at. And I think the reason he ascended to the presidency was not because of any personal charisma he has, but because I think you got it when you said that the right wanted an authoritarian and a populist, a nationalist. And he checked all those boxes. And he was telling people what they wanted to hear. He was reflecting their bigotry and their prejudice and their ignorance and their fears back at them, and telling them, all these people who have been saying for years that you're wrong for not liking immigrants, or you're wrong for thinking that these people are here to take our jobs or to change our culture or whatever. You're not wrong. You're right. You were right all along. That was the appeal of Trump in very broad, very simplistic terms. He appealed to people's prejudices. He appealed to people's ignorance. He appealed to people's fears and said, you are completely right to feel all of these things. And the people who are saying you should change, they're the ones that are wrong. And I'm going to hurt them. That's also important. Trump was promising to hurt the people that his supporters and the Republican Party wanted to hurt and still want to hurt. But no, it wasn't his charisma. He doesn't have any charisma. At least not to speak of. And the second question, if we disqualify toxic creeps from making films, then yes, a lot of incredible films would not be made. In addition to Hitchcock and Kubrick, both of whom were geniuses and both of whom were notorious for mistreating actors on set. You also have the case of Charlie Chaplin, who is one of my favorite filmmakers and actors ever made and starred in and wrote and directed some of my favorite films, some of the most beautiful movies ever made. I don't think he had a reputation of being abusive on set, but there are, for years, he had a reputation of being a casting couch guy. Of sexually harassing and sexually abusing even women who auditioned for him, forcing women to humiliate themselves for his sexual gratification, or just because he got a kick out of it because he thought it was funny and he had the power to do it. I mean, there are horror stories about Chaplin, and I don't think any of them quite rise to the level of rape, other than statutory rape, because he also had a thing for very young girls. Let us also not forget. So, I mean, if we apply those standards to Chaplin and say you're not allowed to make movies because of this, then yes, absolutely. We would lose some of my very favorite films ever. And Kubrick, the same thing. We would lose. I mean, Kubrick's maybe my favorite director. We would, yes. So yes, the answer is yes. We would lose a lot of incredible films if we did that. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, might it not be worth it anyway? If we didn't get City Lights, for example, which is my favorite Chaplin film, one of my favorite films ever. It is a work of art. It is a thing of beauty. It is exquisite. Maybe we wouldn't have gotten City Lights. Maybe we wouldn't have gotten 2001: A Space Odyssey or Doctor Strangelove. We wouldn't have gotten North by Northwest or Vertigo, or The Man Who Knew Too Much, or Psycho, or The Birds, or any of the other classic Hitchcock movies. Yeah, there are a lot of movies we would not have gotten. But what movies did we not get that maybe we would have gotten by the people who would have stepped in and taken their places? There's sort of a fallacy that I think a lot of people fall into when they make these arguments, when they say, like, well, if you disqualify Hitchcock, you don't get any of Hitchcock's movies. That's true. But the fallacy is that, that these were one of a kind talents. And while they were one of a kind in terms of their style and in terms of their personalities, and while I don't think someone else would have stepped up and made the exact same films that Hitchcock made, or the exact same films that Kubrick or Chaplin or Whedon made, it's undeniable. I have absolute confidence that there would still have been great films made in those eras if those directors had not been working. There would have been other people who would have had maybe more of an opportunity than they got because the opportunity wasn't available. And some of them would have made great work as well. See, being a creep, being an abusive asshole on set or on the casting couch or during the production or in any phase of movie making or any phase of creating art, being an abusive creep is not necessary to be a great artist or to make great art. And when we enable shitty people to treat other people in a shitty way because they are a great artist, we are doing ourselves and their victims a great disservice. Because I guarantee you there are filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s on up through today who, if they had been given the opportunity, would have made great films that never existed. And if those great names had not been great names, others would have stepped up and made great work. Like, that's just, I have too much confidence and too much faith in the human imagination and in the bottomless well of human creativity, and in the way that the movies in particular and art in general inspires people to make things and express things and share things and create, amazing objects of art. That I have no doubt that would have happened. So yes, it would have cost us, it would have resulted in a lot of incredible films not being made, but it also would have resulted in a lot of incredible films that were not made being made instead. That's what I think. Lynn Kibblemom says, hello, Steve. I hope you are well. I find myself plagued by weighty questions, the kind that keep you up at night. What is the meaning of life? What kind of fool am I? And what the hell is Stuffy's last name? There's Hans Krieger, Jack McFarland. It's Jack McPherson, actually, but you're close enough. And Stuffy Snuffleupagus? Is Stuffy merely a nickname substituting for a less appropriate birth name like, I don't know, Nigel Fauntleroy or Blake Carrington? I love the Dynasty reference. Or is Stuffy one of those rare celebrity mononyms like Cher or Liberace? Please set my mind at rest on at least one great imponderable. Stuffy is his name. It is not a nickname. And while I have... there have been episodes, there have been Stuffy videos in the past where Stuffy has indicated that Stuffy is his only name and that he is like Cher and Stuffy is his only name. I think Dana and I talked about it a few days ago. Actually, I think we just talked about it yesterday. Because Dana and I are working together now on the Stuffy videos whenever we get around to actually making them again. But I think we decided that Stuffy is his first name, and he does have a middle and a last name. But I don't know if I'm ready to reveal that to you yet. I think I want to save that for a reveal in an episode. But yes, Stuffy. At this point in our considerations, Stuffy is his first name, and he does have a middle and a last name as well. Dataport Doll says, "Evening, Steve. This week I'm choosing to pick your brain about one of the more controversial dilemmas in DS9, Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night, the episode where Kira uses the Orb of Time to see her mother in the past and then starts stepping on every butterfly she sees. There's a lot of controversy over Kira's almost flippant disregard for any kind of temporal prime directive. The fact she assures Cisco he has nothing to fear isn't great. But I have always likened the episode to the movie The Final Countdown, where a 1980s aircraft carrier ends up at the Battle of Pearl Harbor. The characters there, and indeed the servicemen and women who served as extras, broadly decided that the ship was an American vessel and had a duty to defend the U.S. no matter the circumstance. I see Kira's actions in a similar light. Do you have any opinions on how Kira should have conducted herself in the past? I have no problem with the way that episode handled it. If people are looking for some kind of headcanon explanation as to why her adventure in the past did not change the present. It was an orb experience and it was just for Kira, and she was not actually transported to the past. She was just experiencing a version of the past or a vision of the past. There's your explanation. If you demand one, I don't care. If Kira goes back in time and does a bunch of stuff that makes things turn out differently than they did in the past, and then she returns to the present and closes the orb cabinet and everything is normal, like, oh, that's just the way it is. Like, I don't overthink it like that. I don't really care. It's not that kind of an episode. I think we've got, because of, like, you mentioned, like, oh, it's like stepping on the butterflies, because of stories like The Sound of Thunder. I think we've kind of fallen into the habit of defaulting to that kind of time travel story. And that is at least usually paid lip service to in Star Trek. That if people find themselves back in time, that they have to be careful. Don't change the past, don't change the past. And they tiptoe around things, and they have that consciousness. And that's good because it provides an extra source of tension for the story. But it also becomes kind of repetitive because every time travel story has that. And you sort of know that when characters get thrown back in time, that's going to be part of the story. Making sure that the future still turns out the way it did before is going to be part of the story. And doing an episode like Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night, where Kira just does not worry about that at all and just goes, all guns a-blazing, is kind of refreshing. It's kind of refreshing to have a character have that experience where they appear to be at least sent to the past, and changing history is not even an issue. That's not what it's about. The episode is not about that. So I don't have a problem with it at all. And in my somewhat judgmental opinion, I think fans that do have a problem with it are just being nitpicky and are being way too tied up in minutia that does not actually matter to the story. Because I don't, and I think the Final Countdown comparison is a good one. I think, not all time travel stories have to be like that, and it's fine if they aren't. And I think that's a good episode. And one of the reasons it is a good episode is because it just doesn't concern itself with that stuff at all. Science Pundit says, before inauguration, you claimed that if Biden accomplished what he promised, then he would be the most progressive president since FDR. I was skeptical of that claim and still am. Would it even be as progressive as LBJ? After studying each president's accomplishments, I've come to an uncomfortable truth as a cishet white male. If you think that FDR is more progressive than LBJ, then you're probably white. Now that Biden has passed his first law, which I think is great, it's not FDR nor LBJ great. It's still early, not even the first 100 days, but how's your optimism holding up? Well, my optimism, in terms of how much Biden is going to accomplish, I'm trying to keep sort of a realistic level of optimism, but it has nothing to do with Biden himself. It has to do with the fact that there's a filibuster-proof majority of Republicans in the United States Senate that is going to keep him from accomplishing his most ambitious goals for at least the next couple of years, if not for his entire term, unfortunately. And there's really not a whole lot that can be done about that. We can say, like, well, the Democrats can vote to get rid of the filibuster, which would be great, except at least 2 Democrats in the Senate, Manchin and Sinema, have said they don't want to do that. and they would vote against that. So it's not so I mean the people who are jumping on Biden's ass and saying why doesn't he push for the Democrats to end the filibuster, and why don't the Democrats do X, Y, and Z so they can push their agenda through? That would be great. I would love if they would do that, but I don't think it's that simple because there are Democrats who don't want to do that. And that really gets on my nerves. I hate that the majority is so slim that they need to take account of people like Joe Manchin, who is, who is a Democrat, but is about as close to being a Republican as you can be while still being a Democrat. I would love it if there was a large enough majority that they could just say, okay, Joe, vote for whatever you want. We don't give a shit, but they're not in that situation. If they try to pass a resolution ending the filibuster, it's very likely that the resolution would fail because not enough Democrats would vote for it. So my optimism flags because of that, not because of Biden himself. But your observation actually about if you think FDR is more progressive than LBJ, you're probably white. That's a really interesting observation. I might have to think on that. I think you might have a good point there because, yeah, it is worth noting, and maybe in my bias, in my sort of failure to take account of this, maybe I overlook this as well. That some of the most sweeping legislation that LBJ got through was legislation that primarily benefited people of color, specifically Black people. The Voting Rights Act, the Equal Rights Act, not the ERA, but the Equal Employment Act, the Civil Rights Act. That's what I was trying to think of. The Civil Rights Act. Those are acts that were by design were meant to benefit Black Americans who had been victims of institutionalized racism and not so institutionalized racism for centuries, really. So yeah, I mean, and he passed there were other bills that were passed during the Johnson administration as well, Medicare and Medicaid, that Johnson's war on poverty in general that benefited more than just non-white people, but very, very, to a large degree, specifically benefited non-white people. So it's very thought-provoking that you would say that. You may be right that it may be because I automatically defaulted to FDR as the gold standard for being progressive and didn't really pay much attention to LBJ, even though I know that he was also an incredibly progressive president, at least domestically. Internationally, there's the whole Vietnam thing that's kind of a huge black mark on his record, but domestically, he was incredibly progressive. And yeah, I think maybe I have to plead guilty to that and kind of take a second look at that. That's a really good point. That if I automatically turn to FDR as the gold standard for a progressive president and not LBJ, maybe it is because of white privilege. Maybe it is because I am unconsciously underselling or failing to acknowledge the importance of the civil rights legislation that was passed under LBJ. That's a really, really good point. And I think it's an opportunity for self-reflection for me, I think, and for a lot of people. So thank you for that. Blue Tree says, "Hi, Steve. I've been a sci-fi fan all my life, and I've lived through decades of evolving attitudes toward gender, sexual orientation, racial heritage, etc. Thumbs up. Lately, I've read articles blasting some of my old favorites as offensive. Seen through today's lens, they can be problematic, but I look at them as products of their time. For example, TNG's The Host is vilified nowadays for its trans and homophobia, but I don't think that was its intent when created. Is the criticism fair? Could you draw a line between that's the way they thought back then and let's cancel these assholes? I don't mean to come across as an apologist, but many of my classic favorites elicit feelings of fondness at odds with the current climate of anger I cannot and will not discount." I think the criticisms are fair. I think it's completely fair to look at, for instance, an episode like The Host, which was the first Trill episode. Or another TNG episode, The Outcast, which also dealt with LGBTQ issues in a way that is is seen by a lot of people as problematic today, although at the time it was obviously the intent was to strike a blow for equality. But looking back at it now, you can see that they fell short in a lot of important ways. I think it's completely reasonable to point that out and to use episodes like that as examples of what not to do as we create art today in our own lives, applying our own standards. Um, but I also think it's valid to draw a distinction between um, the intent of the creators and the fact that they were people of their time, and to point out that while the common values of the time were different and therefore allowed things like, the problematic aspects of these shows to be more acceptable back then. It doesn't necessarily mean that the people who created them were bad people or were bigots or deserve to be shamed for it. Hopefully they will be like, if the writer of the host or the writer of the outcast, if these issues were brought up to them today, hopefully they would be thoughtful and open-minded about it and would acknowledge that, if they wrote those episodes today, they would do things differently, that now, as our attitudes have evolved, as we are hopefully better informed and more sensitive about trans issues and issues relating to gay people and issues related to sexual orientation and gender identity in general. Hopefully we're a little smarter about that stuff and a little more sensitive and a little more clued in about that stuff today than we were in the late 80s and early 90s. Hopefully, the writers of those episodes would acknowledge that they would want to do things differently today. But it doesn't mean that they were terrible people back then. And I think it's completely fair to make both observations, to say and to still like those episodes if they mean something to you. But it's also okay to say, you know what, I can't watch those. Like, as what I always say when people talk about like problematic faves, like, if you can't watch a Joss Whedon show anymore because it turns out he's kind of a huge dick, that's completely fine. If you acknowledge that he's a huge dick and you still are okay watching his shows, that's fine too. Like, it's a decision that you make for yourself. And with this, I think it's something very similar. I do think the criticism is fair, but I also think it's fair to say that you still enjoy it and that you can, because look, art is imperfect. Like, I don't think there's any such thing as a 100% not problematic piece of art. And it's completely fine to still enjoy things that are problematic, things that were maybe acceptable according to the values and mores of their time, but would no longer be acceptable today. I think it's perfectly fine to make allowances for that. And to say, I still enjoy this, even though if it were made today, it would not fly at all. Like, I think that's all completely legitimate. And it's also legitimate to say it's not for me. I think it's very much a personal choice. Actuarial Lurker says, do you think the Democrats will hold on to the Senate and the House in 2022? I want to say yes. The truth is, I am not sure. I would hope so. I think they should. I think they should not only hold on to it, I think they should gain a larger majorities in both chambers. But the thing is, I thought that this time too, and they just barely won the Senate and they actually lost seats in the House. So, I mean, am I super confident? No, I'm kind of terrified that they're going to lose at least the Senate in 2022. I'm really kind of nervous about that, but I really hope so. I mean, I'm not sure that they're going to lose. I'm not fatalistic about it. Like, I'm not like, oh, I know they're going to lose it. I'm not. Like, I think it's entirely possible that they will hold it and make gains. I really, really hope they do. But there is a strong possibility that they won't. And that makes me nervous. Jacob Monroe, hello, Steve. First, thank you for sharing the GoFundMe last time, and thank you to Some Random Geek, too. Now, for the question, I've liked AEW for the most part, but the big area of frustration from them has been the women's division. The matches are usually really good, but they've rarely had strong angles behind them. In particular, the recent tournament that led up to Revolution. Most of it wasn't even shown on TV, and it didn't accomplish much from a storytelling perspective. I really liked the Abaddon versus Sheeta story, but she hasn't been seen since. The recent Baker Rosa angle gives me some reason for optimism. Plus, they had a better death match than Moxley and Omega. What are your thoughts? Is there reason to expect more improvement? What do you hope to see? I think there is reason to expect improvement. I think I agree with you. I think all of your criticisms there are valid. I think that things are better with the women's division in AEW now than they were a year ago. And hopefully they will be even better a year from now than they are today. I do think there are improvements that you can see. I would like to see more women's matches on Dynamite. They have done a much better job of having something close to parody of women's matches on their YouTube shows. I don't know if you saw the first episode of AEW Dark Elevation, which is the new YouTube show that is hosted by Tony Schiavone and Paul White. But there were a ton of women's matches on that. And that's progress, and that's great. I would like to see more of that on the network show. I would like to see more of that on the TNT show, not just on YouTube. I mean, it's great that they're giving them exposure on the YouTube channel, and those YouTube shows that AEW puts up, they do get really good views. They get hundreds of thousands of views. So, I mean, there are people watching those matches, and fans of AEW are seeking those shows out and watching those shows and seeing those women wrestle and hopefully becoming fans of them. But I would like to see more of that on the main show that is actually on TV. I mean, I think that's something that they need to work harder on, to get more women over and to feature more women on the show. And over in terms of letting them wrestle, and also letting them not just angles, but letting them talk, letting them cut promos. You know, I mean, I would love to see more women get more promo time than they typically get. Or highlight videos, you know, for some of the Japanese women who don't speak such great English, to feature them in hype videos, you know, to let us know who they are and give us reasons to want to see them wrestle. There's still a long way for them to go. They do need to improve that, but they are improving it bit by bit. So I think there is reason for hope and to expect there to be improvement, because I think there has been improvement so far. Yeah. Carl Roberts, beautifulest one, says, "Hey, Steve, hope all is well. So many things have happened this week. The hate-based murders here in Georgia, the passing of the renowned actor Yaphet Kotto, and the airing of the Snyder Abomination. What happened to superheroes? Your recent Batman vid with Dana was clarifying. I'm clear that I view superheroes as symbols of a system that I define as oppressive. And from what I saw in the Snyder film, the consensus is that they are just that, flawed and debased representatives of a similarly defined system. The idea that superhero tales can't embody the joy like that of the first Superman film is sad. They are now angst-ridden, mistrustful beings, conflicted about helping those in need. What purpose do they serve? They don't call us to focus on our higher nature, or even ideas like powers aren't necessary to be heroic. Inner turmoil and conflict make for interesting story elements, but is there a way to combine fully human characters without erasing the hope and joy they used to represent?" Yes, I think there is. And you cited a good example of that in your question, which was the first Christopher Reeve Superman movie. But I also think that there's a very good example of that on TV right now, which is the Superman and Lois series on the CW. I think so far, and we're only 4 episodes into it, and it has. I mean, it's been very good. Right. And especially the characterization of Superman has been fantastic, has been pretty much everything I would want from an adaptation of Superman. And it shows us that he is not perfect, that he is flawed, that he sometimes falls short, especially in terms of being there for the people in his life. There are sometimes that, just because he is Superman and he is occasionally called away to perform a super heroic rescue or something, that he isn't always able to be there for his kids or for his wife. That there are unavoidably, there are times when he is going to let people down, and the show acknowledges that, and the show lets us see that that weighs on him, that is a source of tension in his life, and that, I think, is a really good way to do that. um, so that it doesn't, but it's not angsty, it's not broody, it's not dark and grim and violent and hopeless. It's the opposite of all of those things, but it still manages to show us a character with some humanity and some dimensionality and some nuance. So I think Superman and Lois is a good example of what you're talking about, and I think the the best of the Marvel movies are examples of that as well. And I think the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies are also examples of that, where they manage to show us a character with some complexity, who also is aspirational, who is admirable, who does not inhabit a completely hopeless, joyless, violent world like the world of the superheroes in the Zack Snyder movies. So I think it's definitely possible. There's definitely a way to do it, and more filmmakers are doing it. And I have not seen the Snyder cut. I have no intention of watching it. But my guess, from having seen the films that led up to it, or some of the films that led up to it, because I never watched the theatrical cut of Justice League either, and having seen other films that Zack Snyder has done, my guess is that it is just what I said, that it is bleak and joyless and, you know, ponderous and self-serious and up its own ass with its own fake profundity, because that's just Zack Snyder's aesthetic. Um, but hopefully that movie will end up being a creative dead end, and they'll show it, and all the Snyder stands can get it out of their system, and then they can move on and make other movies. Hopefully that's what's going to happen. There's a scene in Man of Steel, that unfortunately I think describes the attitude of superheroes in those movies. And it's a scene when it's pitched as like a very inspiring scene, but it's actually not. It's actually kind of depressing. And the way it positions Superman relative to the rest of the world is very, very telling. And it's the scene in Man of Steel when Jor-El, his Kryptonian father, or the hologram of Jor-El, is talking to Superman, and he's telling him, he's giving him that movie's version of Jor-El's speech to Clark at the end of the first act of the Christopher Reeve Superman, when he says, when the Marlon Brando version of Jor-El says, they can be a great people, Kal-El, they wish to be. They only lack the light to show the way. That is why I have sent them you. And it is for this reason, their capacity for good, that I have sent them you, my only son. And Jor-El in Snyder's version takes that same basic speech and reframes it so that the people that Superman is meant to inspire are going to be forever chasing him. He's going to set an impossible standard, and they will never be able to catch him. The line goes something like, they will race behind you, they will stumble, they will fall, but eventually they will join you in the sun. But it always has Superman ahead of them. It sets Superman apart from the regular people. And he is not, he's racing ahead of them, and they are chasing after him, and they will never catch him. They will join him in the sun, but they will never reach his level. They will never attain the same. So he is like this, he's above them. And that's not where I think Superman should be. Superman should set an example, yes. Superman should should be something that we aspire to. But he should not be, the whole point of Superman is that it's not an unreachable standard. Yeah, we don't have superpowers, like you said in your question. Like, powers aren't necessary to be a hero. We can't leap tall buildings in a single bound. We can't, have bullets bounce off our chests. But we can be good people in the same way that Superman is. We can care about each other. We can help each other. We can try to be there for each other in the same way that Superman is. And so when you frame it as he's this thing up there, he's this godlike figure that you can never, ever actually reach, that you're constantly always going to be chasing and falling short of, that to me is not a terribly compelling way to view it. And that is how Superman and all of the heroes in the Zack Snyder movies are viewed. They are gods. They are above us, and they are always above us, looking down on us and deigning to share their power with us, deigning to reach down and help us every once in a while. Not only is that depressing and fatalistic and authoritarian and kind of nihilistic, it's just boring. I just find it really, really boring. But that's the Zack Snyder take, and hopefully that take is falling out of fashion, and stuff like Superman and Lois in the Marvel movies will continue to be the more common way of looking at it. Some random geek who doesn't have a clever title this time. Since Dana and I are going to be on the next Monday conversation stream to talk about anarchism, assuming my new computer comes in today or tomorrow, I personally don't want to do the stream on a phone or tablet because I want to interact with the chat, and my current laptop is dying as it got its 4th blue screen of death. Might as well ask you some things that I can respond to in depth on the stream. And by the way, update, as some random geek has mentioned in the live chat, he did get the new computer, so awesome. But anyway, why is a stateless society unsustainable? Because there are many human societies, current and past, that function without a state. Why do you associate social pressure as mob rule? If social pressure is mob rule, then the masses protesting are that mob, since public protests are applying pressure to the government to end police killing black folks, as an example. No justice, no peace, no racist people. But that is the mob as it is. And why is it that if two guys can't share a TV, does that mean the end of a stateless society? Okay, well, the main reason why I think a stateless society is unsustainable is that if you do somehow manage to establish a stateless society, that I don't think that stateless condition is going to last. I think eventually somebody or some group of people is going to come in and either impose a state, or the people themselves will realize that things work better with institutions, and a state will either be consciously created or will just sort of happen naturally as institutions and bureaucracy kind of accumulate. I just think that's how things are going to go. Like, I think it would be very difficult in today's day and age, especially. I think it would be very difficult to establish a stateless society. And if you did establish one, I don't think it would be maintained, because I just don't think that's a very good model. That's another, I don't think it's a good model for a society. I just don't. And obviously there are problems with states as well. There are problems with governments. I mean, there's no government that is perfect. There's no state that is perfect or could be perfect. But I think it's probably a preferable layout, a preferable way of organizing a society than a stateless society. And when I was saying mob rule, I mean mob rule in terms of there being no other recourse. I mean, protesters, yes, I suppose there could be instances where protesters, you could describe them as acting like a mob or being a form of mob rule. And maybe there may even be times, I have to admit, when something like that would be good. Like, I'm not that upset about them taking over was it in Portland where they took over the police station? I mean, I wasn't like super upset about that. I thought, I wasn't like, oh, arrest them, arrest those thugs. Like, I didn't really have too many bad feelings about those protesters overrunning that police station, in light of what had happened. But the fact that in the society depicted in The Dispossessed, that there is no institution, there is no government to appeal to, there are no legitimate authorities empowered by and limited by the will of the people and the rule of law. So the mob is really all you've got. And that was really what my objection was. The fact that, that there's nothing to rein in the mob, there's nothing to restrain the mob, but for the mob, there's really nothing else to appeal to. I mean, so that was my biggest problem with it. And the fact that two people can't share a TV doesn't mean the end of a stateless society. It just means that the situations like that are why I think institutions like courts would inevitably have to be developed, because there will be eventually there will be irreconcilable conflicts. And the example of two people being unable to come to an agreement as to how to share a TV or dispose of a TV between the two of them, that's just an example of the kinds of things that will inevitably happen. Which is why I think, if you create a society and you say no hierarchies, nobody will be above anybody else, and nobody will have authority over anybody else, and there will be no power to compel or coerce anybody to do anything they don't want to do. And okay, so what happens when you reach a point where there are irreconcilable disagreements? Who decides? But so anyway, yeah, that's. But we'll talk about this more on Monday, I'm sure. CMAX says, so Steve, Disco and TNG premiered 30 years apart. Yep, 30, not 20. We are old. Which also kind of makes it all the more fun that Sir Patrick Stewart came back for Picard, regardless of what anyone thought of the series itself. Some might say he knows where his bread is buttered, but even I'm not quite that cynical. So back to my original point. No question, just we're old. Yep, we sure are, buddy. We're old. We're going to be dead so soon. Yeah. Thanks for reminding me of that. I appreciate it, man. I really do. And finally, actually, no, not finally, because there was another question. But Joe McClory says, other than loving Quantum Leap and all things Scott, that's Scott Bakula, buddy. Scotty Bax, Scobax. You put some respect on his name, Scott. Can you defend your position of Voyager being less good than Enterprise? I mean, is more of a mediocre show better or worse than less of a mediocre show? I mean, there were 3 more seasons of Voyager, and it never really got all that good. So, there's that. There's just more of it to get through if you're a completist. Why do I like Enterprise more than Voyager? Other than the Bakula factor, which does play a very large role, I admit. I think aesthetically Enterprise is more interesting. I think the ship looks more interesting. I think the lower level of technology, the fact that Enterprise had its own look in terms of the set design. It had its own look. Voyager looked just like the starships we saw in Deep Space Nine, looked just like the starships we saw in Next Generation. Voyager sort of took the aesthetic that had been established in Next Gen and carried it forward a little bit, but it was still mostly the same aesthetic, right? Whereas Enterprise, it wasn't like a radically different aesthetic. I think by the time we got to Enterprise, that was one of the things about that TNG era of Star Trek in general, is that their sense of design and their sense of style for the shows was never terribly adventurous. So it was stale by the time we got to Enterprise anyway. But in terms of the set design, in terms of the interiors, in terms of the way the uniforms looked, and still little details like the way the consoles looked and stuff like that. It looked different than it looked in Voyager and Deep Space Nine and TNG. Like that part of it at least was fresh initially. So there are things like that I enjoyed. And I like little things like the fact that they still wore neckties and they still wore baseball caps, and they watch like there were more sort of references to things that would be recognizable to us, and it was closer to our own time period, which made it interesting because it wasn't as far removed from our current world as the rest of Star Trek had been. And there were little things about that just made it more interesting on a sort of basic level than Voyager was. So if I was going to argue for why I prefer Enterprise to Voyager, it would probably be something like that. Assuming that I'm not allowed to just say because Scott Bakula's in it, because the truth is that's the answer. And finally, last question from Lisa Garrison, who says, I read a lot of popular science news, and for the last week, my news feed has been filled with articles talking about NASA designs real-world warp drive, after NASA put out a paper updating the model of the Alcubierre drive model from the 90s. So, yay, we are now a century and a source of reliable negative energy away from faster-than-light travel. Any thoughts? I mean, I think it would be wonderful. If we are a century away, I'm not going to be here to see it, probably. But I think that would be great. I would love it if we developed a method of faster than light travel. I mean, it's the only way we're ever going to do any serious traveling, beyond the solar system, I would think. So, I mean, I would love it. Like, I'm not a physicist. I don't know how realistic that model is. I don't know if it's as simple as all we need. And I don't know how, I mean, are we ever going to have a sufficient power source? Or is that just, if we can solve this one unsolvable problem, then we'll be able to do it? Is it that kind of a situation? Or is it actually plausible that in another 100 years or so of development, we could actually do this? I don't know. But I would like to think so. Sure. I think that would be great. So yeah, I guess I'm optimistic. I don't know. Anyway, that was the last question. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks to all of my patrons who asked questions this time around. I love you and appreciate you so much for allowing me to do this. And now for the rest of the show, I'm going to turn to the live chat and we'll spend the rest of the show hanging out with everybody in the live chat. So let's, I think I need to refresh the live chat there. Come on, baby. I'm still not seeing it. There it is. All right. Hi, live chat. I mean, I can see it on this end anyway, but now people watching the video can see it too, and they won't have to, look at the chat window. That is also, it's kind of redundant now that there's chat replay, but whatever. Anyway, Dana, yes, I am enjoying my sludge. Thank you very much. This is from my second pot of coffee today. I was dragging a little bit before the show, about an hour or so before the show. I was sitting here and I was kind of yawning and just going like, So I decided to make some more coffee, and I feel like I've perked up a little bit. So yes, I'm enjoying my sludge greatly. Let me see. Some random geek says, Adam West Batman being a Mary Sue? Really? There are some days when he couldn't get rid of a bomb. That's an excellent point. There was that one time when, although he did get rid of it though, didn't he? He did eventually get rid of the bomb, right? How did that bit end? I can't remember, but he did eventually get rid of the bomb, right? Geralta Trekkie says, I watched some videos about what was planned with the Snyderverse Justice League, and it was getting more dumb and stupider. Why are people still saying, yeah, good flick? I don't know. Like I said, I haven't seen the movie. I think there are obviously people who genuinely enjoy Zack Snyder's movies. I don't get it. I definitely don't get why they enjoy his DC movies. I think everything after Man of Steel and including Man of Steel that he has directed, has been dog shit. But there are people who genuinely like that stuff. I don't understand it, but there they are. And I read an article today about the plan for, like, if he had been allowed to continue on with his version of the DCEU, like what it was going to be. And it basically sounds like the same thing that Marvel did with Infinity War and Endgame, only just way, way, way worse. Like, that was their big idea. Their big idea was that Darkseid would win and conquer the Earth and kill some of the Justice League. And of course, turn Superman to the dark side, as if he's not on the dark side already in Zack Snyder's version. He's already like a murderer and knocks down skyscrapers to try and beat his bag. Okay, but he's going to get even worse now. Of course he is, because Zack Snyder is Zack Snyder. He's like, what if we take Superman? What if Lois Lane gets murdered and then Superman he turns to the dark side and becomes like a killing machine? Like, okay, Zack, what a great idea. You fucking 12-year-old in a grown man's body. What a great idea, Zack. Let's make Superman into like a into a murderer and make like a multi-billion-dollar franchise. And I know they've done it in video games, and I know they've done it, blah, blah. It's a stupid idea. And can you imagine Zack Snyder doing that? Can you imagine Zack Snyder giving himself full license to say, let's make a dark Superman movie where he's like a killer? I hate it so much. But anyway, the bad guys win, and then the remaining good guys send the Flash back in time to change history. So it's basically the exact same plot from Endgame, only Endgame wasn't actually about changing history. It was about getting the getting the infinity gems from the past so they could bring them back to the present and read and undo the snap. But it's the same basic plot. You screw things up in the present, which led to a terrible future. So now you're going to go back in time to somehow undo or fix that future. It's the exact same plot as in Infinity War and Endgame, and that was Zack Snyder's big idea for the Justice League. What a shock. Do the same thing Marvel did, just do a way shittier job of it. Yeah. Throughout the Trek, he says, was your last professional YouTuber video ending inspired by Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, a movie that everyone loves, but I actively hate? Question, why do people like Tarantino? I think it wasn't the last one. It was the one before that, the one where I opened the case and like the light comes out and I'm screaming at it. Yeah, I mean the bit with it's opening it's the mysterious briefcase from Pulp Fiction. Yeah, I mean that's definitely one of the reasons I did that for sure. And why do people like Tarantino? I mean, I think he's a great director. I think he has a wonderful sense of where to put the camera and how to move the camera. I think he's a great director of action. I think he's a great writer of dialogue. I mean, you know, if he's not to your taste, that's fine. Like that's completely cool. You don't have to like him. But I think he's terrific. Super chat from Kirok 2011. I have a Deep Space Nine question. Love your channel, by the way. The end. How was Odo supposed to go back to rejoin the link and cure his people when the wormhole at that point was still closed? Good question. I guess nobody thought of that. I guess it's a good thing that they reopened the wormhole, huh? Yeah, I never really thought of that. Some random geek. So Zack Snyder wanted to make his version of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Yeah, I guess you could look at it that way too. Yeah. 255 AD says, as a NASA fan, I've been wondering how you feel about them outsourcing their manned launches to SpaceX. I hate it. I have no problem with private companies doing their own space launch. Like, I mean, if SpaceX and Blue Horizon and those other private companies want to pursue private space flight, I think that's great. I do not think it should be taking the place of NASA doing its own launches. I think that is a byproduct of how NASA has had its funding slashed over the years, and so to the point where they can no longer really afford to pursue human space flight on their own, and they have to outsource it to private companies like that. I think it's terrible. I think that NASA should still be pursuing its own in-house, publicly funded human space flight. So no, I'm not. I have nothing against SpaceX as a company or what it's doing, but I have a huge problem with it supplanting NASA doing its own launches. Absolutely, I'm not a fan of that at all. Radical Bacon, what would you do if you were contacted to direct a commercial for a local business? Depending on what the business was, I would probably say yes, just for the experience, just because I've never done that before. I would wonder why they were asking me, seeing as how I've never done that before, except just directing stuff for my own YouTube channel. But yeah, depending on what the product was or what the business was, yeah, I would probably say yes, just to say I did it and to get the experience and see if I liked it. Maybe if it was something I wanted to do again, given the opportunity. Throughout the Trek, he says, so I just continued writing my 6th fanfic, which I was pausing until I wrote the 3rd fanfic. I'm on page 57. Would you read a 10-book-long Star Trek fanfic? No, absolutely not. There's no way in hell I would ever read that. But please don't be discouraged. Don't take that as me saying you shouldn't write it. Like, write your heart out. But no, there's no way I'm ever reading that. Yeah, some random geek. Yeah, it would have been Flashpoint. Yeah, exactly. That's what. And I think Flashpoint is still what they want to do for the Flash solo movie. So I think they kind of took that part of it and sort of salvaged it, and now it's going to be the Flash solo movie. But yeah, Flashpoint is totally that. Yeah. Geralta Trekkie, Wonder Woman 1984 is apparently not a good film because of the rape. What is it? What is with people? Sam Beckett jumps in and out and is smooching around. Shouldn't people be a little miffed about that too? Well, some Quantum Leap fans are uncomfortable about that. I'm not so upset about it that it keeps me from being able to enjoy the show. But there are Quantum Leap fans who have noticed that and who have problems with it. So I mean, it's not like that's never been brought up. Super chat from Stephen G. Clenard. Have you watched the recent Stargirl series? In my opinion, it was delightful and the total opposite of Titans. I have not, but Jason has who I just saw in the chat. Hi, Jason. Jason has mentioned it to me as being pretty good, and I think someone else mentioned it to me too as being a good show. So I might try to check it out at some point. But no, I have not watched it. Bu- 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 Sarah Scott says, so I like the Snyder cut and now I feel sad. You're mean. When I build my impulse engine, I'm not going to let you use it. Oh, Sarah, don't be like that. Come on. Don't take it personally just because you like the movie that I'm sure if I watched, I would utterly detest. It's just a matter of, it's a difference of opinion. Um, Jason says, I'm currently writing a video essay about the things about Batman that are definitively negative. Any thoughts? Like examples of things about Batman that are definitively negative. Um, I mean, he probably shouldn't be involving children in his incredibly violent crusade against crime. I mean, if we're looking at it from a real world perspective, I mean, if looking at it, I mean, obviously, as everybody knows, I'm a huge fan of Robin. I think Batman needs Robin. I think Batman is a way more interesting character than Robin. But if we're looking at it like in moral terms, in terms of things Batman does that are wrong, Robin's just about the wrongest thing he does. Like you take like a vulnerable, grieving child who has just seen their parents murdered in front of them, and you say, "Hey, kid, put on this costume and come out on the street with me, and let's fight dangerous criminals together." It's like the worst. It's like it's terrible. It's terrible. So that would be near the top of the list. If we're talking about things that Batman does that are like that are morally bad, it's got to be right up there. Um, and Serenity, no, I have not seen the animated Flashpoint movie, but I take it it's on HBO Max because I think all of the animated movies are on HBO Max. If I'll check it out at some point if I remember. Um, and Radical Bacon, no, this is not 8 o'clock coffee. This is actually just whatever the store brand is of Colombian brew. No, I haven't gotten 8 o'clock for a while. I think originally it was to save money. Now I could probably afford to get 8 o'clock again if I really wanted to, and I just haven't been. But maybe next time I get coffee, I'll get some 8 o'clock. But no, this is just like generic grocery store coffee. 255 AD, how would I feel about a post-money socialist society that still has state institutions like Star Trek? That seems more reasonable to me than a stateless society. Yeah, I think that's more reasonable than a stateless society. Jordan Joan P says, I think if Lois ever does get killed off, I doubt Superman would kill the murderer or seek revenge. Do you agree or disagree? What would you think Superman would do if she does? Yeah, I feel the same way. I think if Lois were killed, Superman would be devastated, would be all kinds of messed up about it. I do not think it would turn him to the dark side. I don't think that usually happens. I think Superman, one of the things that makes him Superman is that he is a genuinely good person. He's not hanging by a thread. Like his goodness is not at the edge of becoming evil. Like he's a genuinely good, kind, caring person. And while it may drive him to a dark place, maybe emotionally, psychologically, if something like that were to happen to Lois, I don't think it would drive him over the deep end. I don't think it would turn him into a murderer. I don't think he would murder the people who killed Lois. I don't think he would become a tyrant. I think that's a really, really shallow take on the character. I just don't think that would happen. So yeah, I agree with you. Jason, the thing, I mean, like, just being Batman is morally and psychologically and socially wrong. Like just being Batman. Like, I mean, again, as someone who likes Batman, I want him to keep being Batman because of the story, because of the character. But from a real world perspective, just being Batman is incredibly wrong. Like, he should not be doing that from a social or a moral or a psychological point of view. Jason says, also, I will be watching the Snyder Cut tonight. Why? Because I can't be critical of a thing without evidence. And 2, so you don't have to. And 3, so you can hear me cry on. Oh, Jason, dude. You don't have to do this. Man. You don't have to do this. You don't have to, man. Although I will say this, if you do watch it tonight, that would be great because, and I don't think I said this to you, and now I'm glad I didn't. Although I think I might have said it to you, Dana. I can't remember. Jason, the only way I can see watching the Snyder Cut would be if I watched it with you. So since you're watching it tonight, enjoy it, because after you watch it, like you will have seen it, so there's no way I'm ever going to watch it. So yeah, thank you for removing that gun from my hand. I appreciate that. Red Spiral Ray with a super chat. Thank you very much. Says, I like the crossover comic where the Kelvin timeline crew met the various lanterns in DC. It was a neat idea. So what crew would you want to see and meet and fight Brainiac? Well, I mean, I guess the obvious route to go would be for the Discovery crew, because they had a similar experience with Control in season 2 of Discovery, and they could maybe draw on their expertise of that and be like, oh God, another evil artificial intelligence. Great. But you could also do the TNG crew because of the Borg. You know, that would be something too. But it might be interesting to have Discovery, because Discovery deserves some love. You know what I'm saying? Another super chat from Stephen G. Clinar. Thank you very much, my friend. Says, who is the most obscure DC hero you think you grok well enough to write credible fan fiction for? Oh, boy. There really aren't any like super obscure ones that I'm big fans of. I mean, my fandom doesn't really go that deep. Like a few years ago, I would have said Shazam. I would have said the DC version of Captain Marvel, but he's had his own movie now. He's not, I don't really think you can call him obscure anymore. But until the movie, I would have said Shazam, but I don't think he counts. So I don't know who I would say now. Dana asks, speaking of losing people we care about, has Stuffy ever temporarily disappeared or gone missing? No, I keep a very short leash on Stuffy. I always know right where Stuffy is. Stuffy has never gone missing. 255AD says, Sam doesn't actually take over people's bodies. He's physically switched with them and morphed to look like them. Everyone gets that wrong. That is true, but other people still treat him as though he is that person. So to me, the rape issue isn't that Sam is, it's not that the body of the person Sam inhabits is being, is being forced to do things without consent. Like in Wonder Woman 84 with the body that Steve Trevor was inhabiting. It's that other people in the life of that person think that Sam is that person. So if Sam, has sex with a woman who thinks that he is the person he leaped into, then he is having that liaison under false pretenses. That, I think, is the quantum leap problem, not the body swap problem. I think. Red Spiral Ray says, do you prefer the artificial intelligence version of Brainiac or the obsessed with knowledge alien? I don't know which I prefer, but I think when Brainiac shows up in Dana and my fanfic universe, it's going to be the obsessed with knowledge alien. It's going to be like old school, like Silver Age, collecting shrunken cities Brainiac, and he will not be an AI. He will be an alien. So I guess that means I prefer that version, but I haven't really given it all that much thought. Brainiac isn't really one of my favorite characters. The only reason I have an idea for a Brainiac story in our fanfic universe is because I had an idea for tying it in with how our version of Superman learns about Krypton and learns about his heritage. And I had an idea for how to tie Brainiac into that. But other than that, like, Brainiac doesn't really interest me all that much, and I haven't given him all that much thought. Uh-oh, Dana says we need to talk about Brainiac then. You had a different idea? Because I was thinking Alien. I was thinking Alien Brainiac. I guess my idea would work with AI Brainiac too, but I was thinking Alien Brainiac. David C. Drake says, are you a fan of the X-Men characters? I look forward to finally getting some great X-Men movies now that the rights are back in Marvel Studios' capable hands. Yeah, I mean, I was never a huge X-Men fan. I watched the animated series when it was on when I was a kid, and I liked that for the most part. I've seen the movies and mostly enjoyed the movies. Like, I think the first X-Men movie was pretty good, although maybe a little overrated. I thought X-Men 2 was really good. X-Men 3 was terrible. X-Men First Class was pretty good, although again, I think was a little overrated by people who really, really liked it. X-Men Days of Future Past was a really, really good movie. And X-Men Apocalypse was not so great. And I haven't seen the Dark Phoenix one, so I can't speak to that. But I mean, I generally have enjoyed the X-Men movies. Never really got super into the comics, so I can't really speak to that. But from what I've seen, I love the concept of the X-Men. I think it's a great idea. Dana, Blue Beetle. I know very little about. I don't know nearly enough about Blue Beetle to write him. Not nearly enough. Geralta Treggy says, what do you think of the state of Texas where some numbnut decided to say, hey, let's open up everything and don't wear masks? Oh, you mean the governor? I mean, did not enough people die as a result of the cold snap? They say it's terrible tragedy that all these people died as a result of that awful cold snap. Let's kill some more people from COVID. Like, that's basically what they're saying. I should find out more about Blue Beetle. Okay, I guess. Like, do I need to find out more? Do we have like great Blue Beetle? I mean, I'm sure Blue Beetle is an interesting character. I'm not trying to like knock Blue Beetle, but like, do we have great Blue Beetle ideas for our fanfic series that I need to do some Blue Beetle research? Yeah, okay, yeah. As far as Brainiac, Dana says, as far as Brainiac being someone who's obsessively curious and wants to find things out, and perhaps isn't evil, I can work with that. I think we could do him that way. He doesn't necessarily have to be like consciously evil, Yeah. Oh, I guess you do have a Blue Beetle idea. Okay, well, we'll have to talk about that. We'll have to talk about Brainiac next time we have like a conversation about fanfic. We'll have to talk about Brainiac and we'll have to talk about Blue Beetle, I guess. Oh, Jason, listen, to be completely honest, like if you said let's record a riff track of the Snyder Cut, I might be up for that. While playing D&D, absolutely not. And that's why you said that, isn't it? So we wouldn't. You knew I wouldn't say yes. It was like when Michael Keaton intentionally asked for way too much money to do Batman Forever because he didn't want to do it. So he intentionally asked for too much money. That's like you saying, "Oh, let's do a riff track of the Snyder Cut, Steve, while we play D&D." You know I'm saying no to that. You know it's safe. Geek Filter says, what upcoming Trek show are you most looking forward to? Also, TGIF. Absolutely. And thank you so much for the super chat, my friend. Probably Strange New Worlds. I'm looking forward to season 4 of Discovery as well, because I think I've pretty much become a really big fan of Discovery at this point. But I'm looking forward to Strange New Worlds. I'm really looking forward to seeing that Enterprise again, both the outside and the bridge set of the Discovery version of the Enterprise is just gorgeous. I love it so much. So I'm probably Strange New Worlds is what I'm looking forward to the most. Beautifulest one. Evening, Steve. I love the recent Trek, actually. What about the blatant misogyny and racism that was vomited up by its detractors as proof it's not Trek? Boy, howdy. Yeah, you are right. I think I'm probably going to have to do a separate video about that at some point, because a lot of people pointed out that I did not mention that in my video about why people hate new Star Trek. And you are totally right. And so has everybody else who has pointed out that in many cases, not everybody, I feel like I always have to qualify that, because whenever I say that a lot of people hate the new Star Trek shows because they're just straight up racists and misogynists who can't handle the fact that there's more diversity than they're comfortable with. There's always someone who says, that's not why I don't like it. So, okay, not everybody who doesn't like it is not liking it for those reasons. But I think it's undeniable that a lot of people, especially those who are like the most vocally angry about it, who like constantly are tweeting about it and making videos about how much it sucks and what a disgrace it is and how it's going to get canceled any day now because it's such an abomination and a blight on the face of Star Trek. And like, a lot of them are motivated by racism and sexism. And I don't think it's that controversial to say that. So I think I need to do a video specifically about that at some point. But yeah, because you're right. That's totally a thing. Dana says, so you'd rather watch the Snyder Cut than play D&D? Absolutely. That's not even a question. Absolutely. That's not even a sadistic choice. I know I'm not going to enjoy the Snyder Cut, or I don't know, but I presume I'm not going to enjoy the Snyder Cut if I were to watch it. Like, that will be my expectation. Could be wrong, but I presume I'm not going to like it. But I would much rather watch the Snyder Cut than play D&D. Absolutely. You cannot overestimate how utterly boring I find the concept of playing D&D to be. It's just, how can I possibly say it any more convincingly than I have already said? It is just not my thing. When people start to talk about it, I get bored. Just thinking about it bores me to death. Beautifulest one, you're very welcome, my friend. Seal0626 says, Ari, why people hate new Star Trek. I love the irony of TNG lovers using the term new Trek unironically. Like, you can tell from the spelling that it dates from the 80s. It was for TNG. Yeah, well, it's what I said in my video. It's exactly it. Like, at one point, TNG was new Trek, and the people who hated TNG back then hated it for exactly the same reasons that a lot of people hate the new shows now. And yes, people can say like, well, but the original, the first couple seasons of TNG were pretty bad. Yeah, they were, but that's not what it was about. Like, that's my whole point. It wasn't about the quality of the show. It was about the fact that it was different. And that was the main motivation. People hated it before they had even seen the show, like Discovery, like the new Star Wars movies. People hated it before they had even seen it because it was different. That was it. It's just like other people. I'll probably talk about this in when I do a comment response video next. Because I use the example of the King James Bible and how there were people when the King James in 1611, when the King James was first released, there were people who rejected it. And I proposed that in many cases they rejected it because it was different, because it was not what they were used to. And members of the clergy rejected it, and scholars and theologians rejected it, and just normal lay people rejected it. And it was because it just was not what they were used to. And people came back at me in the comments and said, well, it's also a really inaccurate translation, and there are a lot of scholars that have a lot of reasons. Yeah, but that's not the point. That's not the point. I'm pretty sure like regular churchgoer, common folk, most of whom weren't even literate in the 17th century, who rejected the King James when it was first published. I'm pretty sure most of them weren't pointing out inaccuracies in the translation. They didn't like it because it wasn't familiar. That was my point. Super chat from Red Spiral Ray. Thank you again, my friend. How would Starfleet react if a Godzilla-like creature appeared on Earth? Would they capture and study it? Would their plan be to kill it? What would Picard do? Oh, I think they would definitely not want to kill it. If at all possible, I think they would want to save it and capture it safely and study it. I mean, that's what Picard wanted to do with the crystalline entity, which, is kind of like Space Godzilla in a way, if you think about it. Yeah, I think the Starfleet way would be that they would be willing to destroy it if they had to, but I think their first priority and their preference would be to try and capture it. Definitely. Another super chat from Geek Filter. In 1973, people were circulating flyers around conventions saying Star Trek the animated series shouldn't come to TV because it's not real Star Trek. Boy, I did not know that. It doesn't surprise me that you knew it, but I did not know that. But that is another great example. And Star Trek the animated series was the first new Star Trek after the original Star Trek. So it is as old as there has been new Star Trek. There have been people, and for no other reason than because it is not what the other thing was. And like I said, that's not what all of it is about. There are people who dislike the new shows on their own merits because they just don't like them for whatever reason. They have problems with the writing, with the plotting, with the pacing, with the acting, whatever. That's fine. People have different opinions, right? Art is subjective. But a lot of the really, really angry, vitriolic, bitter, entitled reactions to the new shows are because they are not like whatever your favorite version of it is. And that is a great example that I did not know that people were actually passing flyers around at conventions that were anti-animated series. That's that, but it goes along with what I've been saying, that for as long as there has been new Star Trek, people who liked whatever the other version was have hated it for no other reason than because it's different. Dana points out that the King James was seen as sacrilegious to put scripture in the common tongue, and it made it possible for lay people to question it rather than simply accepting. Well, that's a good point. That's a good point. And you're right. That I'm sure that was a motivation behind a lot of the resistance to it. But I would point out, and maybe I'm stretching it too far to try and fit my own argument into that. But I mean, that is a difference. That is a very important way in which the King James was different. And also, actually, I can even say this: the King James was not the first English translation of the Bible. So if there were people at the time who preferred like the Bishop's Bible to the King James, Bishop's Bible was also in English. Or the Great Bible, which I think which was the most popular English version of the Bible before the King James. Would that not be a case? Because I mean, if you didn't believe that it should be translated into the common tongue, then you probably would have rejected all of the English translations. But if you liked, say, the Great Bible, but you didn't like the King James, that would be an example of you didn't like the King James. It would possibly be an example, not necessarily. It would possibly be an example of not liking it because it was different than what you were used to. Radical Bagan, would you play a space-based role-playing game? Nope, I would not. Serenity Geek, are there some fans who are like, I like Star Trek before it got popular? Yeah, kind of. Yeah, there are fans who watched it back in the day when it was originally on NBC in the 60s. And I've had comments from people on my videos who say things sort of like that. Yeah. There are people. I don't think there are that many people in terms of a percentage of the fan base. I don't think there are that many of them because the franchise has gotten so much more popular in the intervening decades. But yeah, sure. There are some hipster Star Trek fans who are like, I watched it before it was popular, for sure. And to be honest, if it weren't for them originally, the show wouldn't still be around. Like, it was those fans who liked it before it was popular who got it back for a third season and kept it going and kept it popular enough in syndication where it also accumulated new fans in syndication. That's another reason why it came back as an animated series and as a movie, because it got more popular in syndication. But because it did have that fan base of people who loved it, even though it wasn't super popular in the beginning. That's why it's still here. So we owe them, even though some of them might be kind of hipsterish and kind of jerkish about it now, although not many of them are in my experience, but maybe some of them are. But without them, we wouldn't still have it. So, Lisa Garrison says, do you think Batman v Superman would have been a better movie with a version of Robin in it? I don't think it would have made any difference. Not not knowing if Zack Snyder still directed it, if it still had basically the same script and the same take on the characters, I don't think having Robin in it would have made any difference at all. No. Lack of Robin was not the problem. Another super chat from Red Spiral Ray says, I consider Star Trek as meaningful art. Would you agree, Steve? Yeah, sure. I'm not precious about the definition of art. I think Star Trek, at least certainly Star Trek at its best. I don't know if every single episode or movie qualifies as meaningful art, but Star Trek in general and Star Trek at its very best qualifies as meaningful art for sure. I think The Visitor is certainly meaningful art. You know, I think Far Beyond the Stars is certainly meaningful art. And I mean, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Deralta Trekkie says, you don't like Voyager, but what is your favorite and your least favorite episode of Voyager? Favorite episode is probably The Thaw, the one that guest stars Michael McKean as the clown who is the embodiment of fear in like a virtual reality system. That's a good episode. Least favorite episode? Oh, boy. It's hard to pick least favorite episode. Probably Year of Hell, just because the reset button at the end of it is so annoying. Like they finally give the show like a year's worth of character development, and then they just hit the reset button at the end. And you know it's coming because you know that. I mean, you can tell as you watch the episode that it's not going to stick. Like you know they're not going to. Somehow they're going to get out of this, but it's still annoying. It's like, oh, thanks for completely wasting my time for 2 episodes. I appreciate it. Beautifulest one. Yes, the Ensign's Log is role play. Absolutely. The Ensign's Log is definitely role play, but it's not a role playing game. Exactly. Dana says we don't have stats. Exactly. We don't have stats. I don't, if Jason had said, hey, Steve, do you want to do a Star Trek podcast? And then I said, absolutely. And he said, great, fill out this character sheet. Click. It's just not my thing. It's role playing game. Here's role playing games for me. Role playing games are when you take the boundless creativity of your imagination and you combine that with math and record keeping, and that just does not seem fun to me. That does not seem fun to me at all. That seems like taking the fun bit and then attaching a whole bunch of extra shit that is just not fun. Dana, you can totally make a character sheet for Ensign Johnson. That would be great. If you're like, if that's what you're into, that'd be fantastic. But I'm not going to do it. Serenity Geek, I mean, I'm not a huge stat head for baseball either, to be honest. Like you're right that I probably am more conversant in baseball stats than I am in other contexts. But like, I'm not like a huge stat nerd in baseball either. I mean, I think you still have a good point. I'm more interested in stats in the context of baseball than I am in most other contexts, but it's really not the main thing I'm interested in. And like, I'm just not that kind of a baseball fan. I'm not really into the whole Moneyball thing. Or I mean, I think the Moneyball stuff is like interesting in abstract, but like that's just not how I approach the game. That's not what I like about it. Yeah, and baseball does have record keeping and math, but baseball is a sport. I mean, the record keeping and the math happens after they play the game, or someone else is doing it while they're playing the game. Like baseball players don't have to fucking roll the dice and keep track of shit while they're playing the game. They go out and they play the game. Other people keep track of the stats. 255 AD, can you be a hipster if you're like 70? Sure, I think hipsterism is a state of mind. I think you can be hipsterish about certain things. Yeah. But I guess it also kind of depends on, how you define it. Red Spiral Ray with another super chat says, one last nerdy one for the road. Would Superman agree with the Prime Directive? That's a really interesting question because in certain versions of Superman, he kind of does have a form of the Prime Directive in the Christopher Reeve, um, in the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. The Elders of Krypton, Jor-El, and then later the Elders of Krypton after Jor-El sort of gets phased out, tell him that he is not supposed to interfere in the natural flow of history. That he can do heroic feats and he can help people and stuff, but he is not to take it upon himself to affect the flow of history or to change like the natural course of history on Earth through his presence. So that is kind of a Prime Directive. And of course, we see it's a major, major point in Superman the Motion Picture that he violates that directive when Lois dies. Like that's his big moment of decision in that movie. And he's faced with a choice. And his choice is between the advice of his Kryptonian father, Jor-El, which is it is forbidden for you to interfere in the natural course of events, and his human father, Jonathan, who says, you were put here for a reason. And we know which one he chooses. He chooses to follow the advice of his human father. And he turns back time and brings Lois back. So he does have a Prime Directive, and he violates it. Just like a starship captain would in Star Trek. So I think he would have in practice, he has had a similar attitude towards it, toward his version of it, at least in the movies, at least in that version of Superman. He's had a similar attitude towards it as is typical of protagonists in Star Trek, which is you generally acknowledge that it's a good idea, that it's a good rule, but there may be times when you have to break it because that's what Superman does. Derogatory Trekkie, if they say, hey, we're going to do a Wonder Woman show, but without Gal Gadot, since we cannot afford her on a TV show, who would you cast as 1D? And I have no idea. I will throw that open to the peanut gallery. I have no idea. CMX, what about Radical Bacon's point? What if Opinionville is rolling a die while you're improving Ensign's log to determine a reaction? If he's doing it for him, I mean, whatever. I do not interfere in another actor's process. If Jason wants to roll dice and do it RPG style to determine what his character does or determine what happens next in the show, like, I mean, that's up to him. But I ain't keeping no stats and I ain't rolling no dice. And if it becomes more like an RPG than like an improv session and than like recording a podcast has been, then I'm not gonna be enjoying myself. Like, I'm just not. It's just not my thing. But if Jason decides that in order for if Jason decides that instead of using his unfettered imagination and creativity, that he needs to roll fucking dice to decide what happens next, then that is his decision. Geek Filter says Catherine Hahn is a Wonder Woman. Hey, I could see that. Adrian Pilecki, yeah, maybe, because she was in the pilot, and then that pilot didn't. And I think she could still be a decent Wonder Woman. That might be a good one, sure. Derelta Trekkie says, why do we like the Arrow show, even though it goes dark sometimes, and we don't like the Snyderverse? Because the shows in the Arrowverse have different shades. The shows in the Arrowverse have variation. It's sort of like what my problem was with the Titans show was that, things are always dark and grim. And then all of a sudden they get even darker and grimmer. And it's like, there's no contrast. The Arrowverse was, the Arrow was a really dark show at first. And eventually it kind of lightened up. It acquired more complexity and got more sort of gradations of tone. And of course, when the Flash came along and then the other shows sort of filled out what we now think of as the Arrowverse, the tone really started to change and it became a lot more fun and a lot more sort of light and kind of Silver Age-ish. So, I mean, it has different notes. It's not always the problem with the Snyder's movies is they're constantly playing the same note, and there's no variation. The Arrowverse has variation. So if it does occasionally get too dark for your taste, you know, and you don't like that, it's not going to be that way forever. Geek filter. I was Diana Prince all along. Yep. Kibble Mom, I did know that. Yes, I had heard that story. Yeah, Yaphet Kotto, who unfortunately just passed away this past week. Yes, Yaphet Kotto was considered for the role of Captain Picard. I think he would have been fantastic. Obviously, very, very different than Patrick Stewart. Not only was Yaphet Kotto very different physically than Patrick Stewart, but it just in terms of his demeanor and his style, he was just a very different presence on screen than Patrick Stewart is and was as Picard. So it would have been different. But I think Yaphet Kotto would have been a very interesting Picard. He definitely could have pulled it off. You know. Yeah, Yaphet Kotto was fantastic. Homicide, one of my favorite shows ever, and Yaphet Kotto as G in Homicide was just wonderful. And they really found they were much better at giving him things to do, at featuring him in interesting ways in stories in Homicide than they typically were with the lieutenant characters in NYPD Blue, which is too bad because the lieutenant characters in NYPD Blue, especially Fancy, who was the lieutenant for the first half or so of the run, was, you know, were really good characters played by really terrific actors, and they just were never quite as well served as the other characters. But G in Homicide, I thought, while he was very much a supporting character, was usually given interesting things to do, and you could definitely see that Yaphet Kotto was a fantastic actor. 255 AD says, how the fuck did Gene Roddenberry think the USS Yorktown could be a good name for a spaceship? I don't think obviously we think, you know, now that we know that the ship was called the Enterprise, it's difficult to think of it as anything else. I don't think the Yorktown is a terrible name. You know, I don't think it would have been a terrible name. 255 AD also says, you remember the scene in The Incredibles where Bob thinks Syndrome has killed his family. He has an opportunity to kill his henchwoman, but can't do it. Very Superman-like. Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what I'm getting at with when I say that I don't think losing Lois like that would drive him over the edge. I don't think it's the same thing. He's genuinely a good person. Like, he's not looking for an excuse to go to the dark side. And he's not one bad day away from it. He's more stable than that. His kindness and his goodness runs deeper than that. And I don't think that would happen. And it wouldn't happen. And if I was writing it, it certainly wouldn't. No, Stephen, not better than the USS Funky Town. Certainly not. Certainly not. Yes. And Derogatory Trekkie, yes, I think that, I don't know if that is officially canon or not, but I don't know if that was ever established on screen anywhere, but yes, the common explanation is that the Enterprise A was actually the USS Yorktown that was recommissioned as the Enterprise A. Yeah. Lisa Garrison says, did you ever read The Invisibles? No, I did not. CMX says, how much fear do you have that if we kill the filibuster, we then lose the Senate in 22? Not as a result, just because the Senate is naturally tilted GOP. I've never really thought about that. I mean, I don't think they're going to kill the filibuster, so I don't think it's going to be a problem. But I don't know if I think actually if they kill the filibuster and then they actually succeed at passing a bunch of the progressive legislation that Biden has said he wants to pass, and then they actually run on that, like they don't run away from it. They actually, you know, use those accomplishments to sell Democratic candidates to voters. I think it could actually wind up being a really good thing. Derogatory Trekkie, who is your most favorite James Bond? Mine are Roger Moore, Pierce Brosnan, and Sean Connery. Least favorite, Daniel Craig. I've never been a super fan of James Bond, so I don't really have like a strong favorite. I guess Connery, but like I'm not super attached to any of them. Dana says, what are you most looking forward to this weekend? And what's the weather supposed to be like up there in the frozen north? I think the weather's not supposed to be terrible. Let me check the weather. The weather this weekend is supposed to be pretty good. It looks like upper 50s and mid 60s on Saturday and Sunday and into the rest of the week. So yeah, the weather here it looks like it's going to start getting pretty nice. So that'll be good. And what am I most looking forward to? Probably recording our podcast on Sunday. We're recording the first episode of season 4 of the Ensign's Log. I'm really, really looking forward to that. So that's probably the thing I'm looking forward to the most. Maybe I will. I might climb a tree tomorrow. Maybe if it's warm enough and nice enough tomorrow, I might go for a walk on the battlefield and climb a tree. Jacob Monroe says Coke or Pepsi. Coke, easy. Don't even have to think about it. Coke, easy. Dorota Trekkie, if you could come up with a starship name, what would it be? It would be the USS Daedalus, because I just think it's just a cool word. Like Daedalus after the mythological character, but Daedalus, the USS Daedalus. I just think it sounds cool. I would call it that. Lisa asks, any interesting collabs in the works? No, not right now. No, I don't have any coming up that I know of. Okay, Red Spiral Ray has another super chat, says, okay, another. Do you think Tucker Carlson will run in 2024? That seems to be the next insane thing. No, I don't think so. Dana, it's Daedalus. Maybe it is. Is it Daedalus? I always pronounced it Daedalus. Maybe some people pronounce it Daedalus. I pronounce it Daedalus. Yes, Daedalus is Icarus's dad. Exactly. 25 AD, do you think they're going to reform the filibuster, i.e. bring back the Jimmy Stewart version? I think it's more likely that they'll do that than get rid of it outright. And I think that would be an improvement. I mean, it would definitely be better to have it that way than the current way, the 60 vote threshold thing. I think it's more likely that they'll do that then. And I think that because that is seen as sort of a compromise, that's changing it, but not getting rid of it. So I think it's more likely that they'll go for that. But I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't do that either, to be honest. Hi, Varjak. Varjak says dataless because Brent Spiner isn't involved. Exactly. CMAC, Daedalus as my cold dead soul. Aw. Geek Filter informs me that Daedalus is the American pronunciation. So what are you saying? I'm not an American because I pronounce it Daedalus? Is that what you're saying? Okay, whatever. Some random geek says there are senators that will do the standing filibuster anyway. Yeah, and let them work for it, I say. You want to filibuster something? Go ahead, Ted. Go ahead, Rand. Filibuster. Do it the real way. Do it the Jimmy Stewart way. I'm going to make you go ahead and filibuster it. I'm going to make you work for it. I thought so, Geek Filter. I thought so. Dorota Trekkie asks, Samantha Carter, Rodney McKay, or Scotty? Since Scotty is the only one that I'm really familiar with, I'm going to say Scotty. I have I'm not even sure who Rodney McKay is. I know Samantha Carter from Stargate, but I've only seen the first episode of Stargate, so I don't know. But so I'm going to go with Scotty. Yeah, CMAC, exactly. The pee in the bottle, the pee in the bottle filibuster. Exactly. Make him work for it. I just answered Austin LaPlante. I'm sorry you wasted your super chat, buddy, but thank you anyway. Have you ever watched the Stargate shows? Stargate SG-1 has a ship named Daedalus. I don't remember that. I must not be in the first episode. I watched the first episode of Stargate SG-1 and I thought it was good, but that was last year and I never watched anymore. I just kind of, I just like I did with Firefly years and years ago. I watched some of it. I thought that's pretty good. I put it down and I just never picked it back up. And that's kind of where I'm at with Stargate. I watched the two-parter, the two-part pilot episode. I thought that was pretty good. And then I just never watched any more of it. Stargate, and I never watched any Stargate Atlantis. So yeah. Stephen Clenard says, yeah, make him do the pee bottle filibuster and then ban bottles on the Senate floor. Nah, that's playing hardball. I'd like to see that. Jacob Monroe says, "Who should we rename Fort Hood after?" I have no idea, but somebody who didn't fight for an army of traitors would be a good start. But I don't know. Um, well, anyway, I've been going for 2 hours and a quarter, so I believe I'm going to call these proceedings to an end if it's all right with you, and even if it's not, I'm going to do it anyway. Um, yeah, Geraldo Dreggy, I don't know if we're going to do Trek Reluctantly Stargate. Okay, well, I don't know if that would work because I don't know. Hey, I don't know if Dana has seen it. Has Dana? Are you still there? Have you seen Trek? Have you seen Stargate? Um, but yeah, because it kind of doesn't fit the premise if we both haven't seen it. Although I guess we would have to change the show. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for joining me for this. As Some Random Geek just pointed out in the live chat, I do want to remind everybody about the charity links that are in the video description. Please click that link and check out. See, I ain't seen Stargate either, so I don't know. It wouldn't be for a long time anyway, because we got plenty of Deep Space Nine left, and we already know what we're doing after Firefly. So if we ever do Stargate Reluctantly, that ain't gonna happen for a long ass time. Oh, Jamie, thank you so much. Jamie says you are amazing, Steve and Dana. Well, I think we're pretty amazing too, but thank you so much. Anyway, charity links in the description. Check them out. Some friends of ours need a helping hand, need some financial assistance. If you can find it within your heart and your wallet to throw them some extra bucks, please do so. I would greatly appreciate it. And so would Some Random Geek, and so would they. Also, if you want to support my work here on YouTube, you can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives and become a supporter of this channel for as little as $1 a month. And $1 a month gets you access to all of the patron-only stuff. You get to vote in the polls to choose upcoming Trek Actually topics. Stephen Killar, thank you once again for the super chat, my friend. I appreciate that. And you can also submit questions ahead of time for Ask Away, which is the show that you're watching the end of right now. Patreon.com/Steven. $5 a month or more gets you a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video. And also, don't forget the podcasts that I co-host. There is Late Seating, the movie review podcast that I co-host along with the brilliant Jason Harding, where we review movies. And we are our next movie is going to be Close Encounters of the Third Kind. We're actually recording that on Sunday. And then also the Ensign's Log, which features myself and Jason and also Dana Cole. We are where we play low-ranking officers aboard a certain famous Federation starship that is now going to be embarking on a certain ongoing mission because we're jumping shows. We're moving from TOS to TNG, starting season 4, and we're recording our first episode also on Sunday. I'm so looking forward to it. And hopefully those of you who have been fans of the show for a while have been looking forward to it as well and are going to come with us on this next leg of the journey. And if you haven't been listening to the Ensign's Log, it's perfect because, yes, Geek Filter, we skipped TAS. I hope you can forgive us. And it's a great jumping on point because we're starting a new season and we're jumping into a slightly different fiction for the show where we're going to be on a new enterprise as the same characters, although Dana will be playing a new character. Dana will be getting a regular character, just like Jason and I have our regular characters that we always play, and then sometimes we play extra characters. Dana will be playing a regular character of her own from now on as well, which is super exciting. And we've been talking about it and I can't wait. I'm really, really excited for season 4 of the Ensign's Log, everybody. And we're recording it this weekend and you'll get to hear it in about 2 weeks. So yeah, that is letmelistenpodcasts.com to listen to our podcasts. And that's it, everybody. I will be back on Monday for another live stream. It will be the next episode of the conversation stream where I will have 2 guests, and the guests will actually be 2 people that I've mentioned a couple times already. Some Random Geek and Dana will be my guests on the conversation stream. We're going to talk about anarchism, and I'm probably going to get yelled at a lot, and maybe they'll argue with each other too. I think I told you, I mentioned it already. I'm going to try to Yojimbo it and try to get the 2 anarchists to fight each other and not just fight me. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And then Wednesday, Dana and I will be back For the next Trek Reluctantly, we're going to be watching Deep Space Nine, and the episode of Deep Space Nine we'll be watching next week will be the Nagus, the first appearance of the Grand Nagus in Star Trek. And then on Friday will be the next episode of Read Away, where we will be talking about Chapter 11 of The Dispossessed. So that's coming up next week. I think Wednesday I'm also going to be putting up a new Where Do We Go From Here video. The social issue I'll be talking about will be hunger and food insecurity. So that's coming up. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I hope I'll see you for some of those shows and videos coming up next week and beyond that. Everybody have a good night. Have a good weekend. Thank you so much for the questions and the super chats and the support in whatever form you have offered it to me. I appreciate you all so, so much. And I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.